from the UK. And I can say that after spending 50 days with him, his preparation is world-class, professional, and top-notch, and which was at the root of the success of our expedition. So Ian will just share a little bit about himself here shortly, but a recap of a little bit about me, if you don't know myself. I've had the opportunity to travel with Polar Explorers to the North and South Pole since 2005, my first expedition to the North Pole, where I eagerly chased after Rick and Annie across the Arctic Ocean. And we put together a really cool video about that. That's probably on YouTube somewhere, so go check that out. And I'm super psyched to have some past folks, especially Richard and Lori Goldsmith, on the phone call here. I had a chance to ski 2 degrees with them for my South Pole, my first South Pole expedition in 2007. I call Morton Grove my home here in the Chicagoland area. I've got 2 boys, an 8th grader and a 4th grader, and a lovely wife named Stacy. And hopefully some of you have enjoyed her banana bread in really cold, faraway places. And hopefully she'll jump on and she can, you can give her a shout out. So over to Ian so that he can share a little bit of why he was crazy enough to come with me on a really cool journey.
Great, thanks, Keith. Love this picture. It's Keith skiing away in the distance. There's a big storm coming into Antarctica. A few minutes later, we couldn't see a thing. And this is the lead slide for our film, Lunatic, the documentary of skiing to the South Pole. So to tell you a little bit about myself and what my road to Antarctica was, grew up a chartered accountant in the UK, went to live in Zambia in Africa and worked there for a while, really enjoyed that. And got into some high altitude, went to Kilimanjaro, hiked up Kilimanjaro, and just became fascinated by the way I responded to altitude. And I really liked it, and I seemed to be good at it. So for the next 10 years, I pursued lots of climbing, the 7 summits. I managed to climb 5 of them, did some cool climbs in Europe, the Matterhorn, Mont Blanc, and around there. And then towards the end of that 10-year period, I had a pretty bad fall on a climb. And it was ironic that I was wearing the helmet on the left when I fell. I guess it was trying to tell me something. So I decided that I was going to quit climbing at that time before something really bad happened. And some other things happened in my life. I became divorced, lost my job, and I felt my world had pretty much ended at that point. So I had to move on. I did a bunch of other things. Formed my own company, and I've specialized for 20 odd years in restructuring transport companies, airlines, transport companies, courier companies that are really in trouble. And that's helped me with these expeditions because the stress of a company in a lot of trouble can mirror the stress of being on an expedition and having to make those decisions and break problems down. And I've found that both really help me in each other. Here's some pictures from my cycling expeditions. Top left is cycling to the Arctic Ocean on the Dempster Highway. And the picture on the right is in the middle of Australia in the outback. And I cycled across Australia a couple of times on my own, solo, unsupported, and just love being out there in the middle of absolutely nowhere, where you just have to be prepared. You have to have those logistics in place. And it's so liberating for me. I just love it. And when I speak about this to kids, and I tell them anyone can do this stuff. You don't have to be a world-class explorer or an athlete. Get on your bike, ride for a day, put your tent up and ride again, and you can ride across Australia. So you just have to keep going. And I think that's the message that I give to these kids. But during all these expeditions, these 3 characters were never far from my thoughts. Because in the UK, I was taught about the South Pole, taught about Antarctica, taught about Amundsen, Scott, and Shackleton, and the things they accomplished over 100 years ago. And I was fascinated by these guys. I read a lot about it. I read Worst Journey in the World. And I never imagined I would ever get to go to Antarctica, never mind go on an expedition to the South Pole. So when I got the opportunity to do that, I was fascinated by it. It was awe-inspiring for me. Contacted Polar Explorers, got together with Keith, did a polar shakedown. And I thought, I wonder, with all these adventures I've done, the adventure toolkit I've got in surviving out there, can I, at 58, walk to the South Pole? Could I become the oldest Canadian ever to ski to the South Pole at 58? And I was fascinated by that. And that's what really led me to do that and to reach out beyond and say, can I do this thing? I have no idea. It's tough, but can I do it? And so that's how this all came to pass. And I'm going to pass you over to Keith now to talk a little bit about training and logistics for a South Pole expedition.
Sure. Hey, Ian, thanks a lot. Can I ask just a couple questions? So did you cross Australia the same way twice?
No, why would I do that?
Well, just, you know, just asking to.
No, I cycled from Perth to Sydney the first time, and then from Adelaide to Darwin through the outback the second time. We followed the original explorers route, John McDowell Stewart's route through the outback, and that was just a wild and crazy trip. So both ways through Australia, yeah. I'm not going back anytime soon.
Yeah. And so, Ian, thanks for shooting it over to me. So, you know, on the Polar Explorer side of things, you know, we take pride in our ability to enable the reality of making dreams, right? And so Ian had this wild dream, and he wanted to make it a reality. And so much like the approach that he mentioned in terms of, you know, one foot in front of the other, we're going to do, we provided that same sort of infrastructure, breaking every hurdle down in the preparation process. And here Ian is pulling a tire, and I'm sure you did that quite a lot, Ian. I just think I can tell from this photo, you're probably a little early in your tire pulling days. Is that correct?
Well, I think it was a cool day, Keith. The real test for tire pulling is to do it for 7 or 8 hours on an August day when it's 35 degrees. And I did that quite a bit. And we live in a very...
Is this just right outside the home?
No, it's up the road from home in the countryside, but I would end my tire drag in the village and come through the village, which was a very tourist-oriented village, and I'd come up the main street, and all the tourists would run and hide. They wondered who this complete nutcase is dragging this tire up the hill through Elora. So everyone would run because I'd be covered in sweat at the end of the ride. And
you pop in for a pint at the end of your tire pro session?
Of course.
Ah, perfect. You know, did your training expose the community to your endeavor?
Great question. Yes, to a certain extent, although everyone in the village knew about it and the area knew about it because I was fundraising like crazy. And this exposed it, and it gave it some fun as well because people would come out of their houses and say hello to me and stuff like that. So yeah, it gave it a bit more life, I suppose. Reality, you know, is what I was trying to do.
Yeah, you know, in the preparation, a lot of folks want you know, they want to build a community around this this endeavor. You know, it's a personal endeavor, and it is for you, but you involve the community, and we'll see in a few slides, you know, you got involved a charity that you were really proud of, and we'll meet Oscar here. And but I think training allows for you to get into that mental mindset of not only what it's like to pull something for a really long distance for a really long time, but it also exposes you to your community. So, you know, when I go out and train, in different areas, and I'm always getting stopped by people. The kindest ones are usually the oldest ones, and they always seem to be wanting to pray with me or say a prayer for me. Hey, Ian, what would you do differently if you were going to go back and retrain? You got any suggestions, insight in your preparation? What would you do?
Yeah, I'll to answer that question, I'll go to the next slide though. So this is a picture of 266 Cliff Bars before we left. And The one big thing that I would do, I'm not a very big guy, and before I left, I did tons of training, more training than I've ever done for any expedition by miles, and pulling the tire, lots of running and stuff like that, fundraising like crazy, getting things ready. I lost lots of weight before I left because I was working so hard. That was a big mistake. I should have stopped training a month before and just sat down and ate hamburgers and drank beer. I should have put on 20 pounds before I left, because as the expedition progressed and I had lots of problems, as we'll see in a minute, I wasted away. And it's the only expedition I've ever been on where you gradually deteriorate every day. There's no way of replenishing what you're burning. And so you just fall apart, and it takes a while for that to happen. But when it does, it becomes obvious. So I would eat a lot more and train less, Keith. Yeah.
and I think when we were preparing, I remember talking about, like, you know, I remember specifically asking all the team members, like, hey, how's your weight gain going, and how's the training, and that's an interesting thought. Hey, Ian, in this photo, what's your least favorite flavor?
All of them.
All of them. Have you had a Cliff Bar since?
When I came back from Antarctica, the village had a coming home for me at the local pub. And I went there and people bought me gifts. They bought me some Shackleton Scotch, actually, which was wonderful. But one guy shows up with this present, and it was a box of 12 Cliff Bars. and they're still in the basement. So if anyone wants some Cliff Bars to go to the South Pole, I'm your man for that. Special price.
That's your emergency ration.
It's never going to be touched, Keith.
It's never going to be touched. Oh, fun stuff. I'll have to say my least favorite is that pecan pie. I'm not too much of a fan of that one. So I like showing this slide to when I do school presentations. That's always a fun one. I get a big hoot out of that. And then I ask all the kids to raise their hand if they like, white chocolate or macadamia nut.
Yeah.
Hey, there's the team. If I remember correctly, this is when we got dropped off. The plane was still there. This was taken by the pilot that dropped us off. And obviously you see Ian in the red on the left. I'm there in the red, and then Andy Stiles is to my right, and Bradley is off to the right there. We had a very diverse group, right? Ian mentioned that he was 58. In this photo, I'm 40. Andy's 50, and Bradley was in his 30s. So we had a really wide range. And because of circumstances, the full team couldn't meet together beforehand. So we first met, I think we did a couple Skype meetings, so we had a chance to interact and talk to each other, but we didn't get a chance to really meet till we were down in Punta Arenas, which for myself, playing the team leader role was a barrier that I had to manage and think about and prepare. And that was executed through the personal conversations with each team member to get a sense of where they're at, what their goals are. And then, our personalities were really accepting, and we were able to work together and successfully accomplish this feat, which at the start of it was so uncertain for all of us. And I credit the success to the personalities and to the group dynamics. I was going back through my notes this morning, Ian, and reading my trip logs, and my final trip report, just restating that the camaraderie and the ability for all of us to buy in was really a cornerstone for the trip. So, and I don't know if you have any insight into my preparations on your side, like what your take was and what role I was playing.
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about the unique team we had. We were all 10 years apart. And so it really helped because there was never any testosterone competition going on here. I mean, in my wildest dreams, I'd never keep up with Bradley at 30. He would overtake me having set out half an hour before. And so there was never any competition. But I think all our different experiences helped us in different ways. And so I think we complemented each other as a team tremendously, the best team I've ever been on an expedition. But the other thing that I took away at the end of this trip was that they never felt like there was a leader. And that's a positive comment, by the way. It's like watching a hockey game where you don't notice the referee the whole game. It means he's had a good game. And I never felt there was an overpowering leadership feeling to this. We were all experienced outdoor people. And it was more like we just all got on with it. And we worked well together. We got going very quickly every morning and packed up at night. And so we never felt like there was that leadership strength that was needed. It was there, of course, but we didn't feel it was overpowering. And that's another thing I took away. So from the leadership right through the team was totally unique, I felt, anyway.
Yeah, and you know, in this photo, we're all smiling, and I remember that moment with all the energy and you know, we put together those, you know, all the equipment, and we come down to Union Glacier and we're touching everything again, and we were so pumped up. And then that plane took off and the sound dissipated, and then I hear Andy just chuckling like, come back, you know, in that clip. I don't know if it made the LUNATIC movie cut, yeah. But it's one that I use that's classic. And one of the neat things that makes me laugh is we'll have to tell that 11 story and how we got there, Ian. It's a Scottish skit, right?
We wanted some humor, and I think there was a lot of fun on this expedition. And I don't know if anyone's seen it, but all you have to do is Google on YouTube 11 elevator skit. It's a couple of Scottish guys in the elevator, the Burniston boys, and they get stuck in this automated elevator. And we laughed loud about it. And so Bradley came up with the idea, if anyone whinges or complains about anything on this trip, and the others vote on it, you have to do 11 push-ups on the spot. You got to take your skis off, do 11 push-ups, put them back on and carry on. And we had so much fun with it. Outside restaurants in Punta Arenas. Me, when I forgot my sled one day, I had to do 11.
That was great.
And at the South Pole. So it effectively reduced the stress or pressure of things and made us laugh a lot more, you know.
And you know, it was my role to set the expectation of what a daily output would look like. And if you look back at the numbers, we skied for 44 days. We took 2 rest days, and every day we were able to hit our target of 12 nautical miles. And we weren't out of the tent for more than, you know, skiing for more than 9 hours. So, you know, it was, and all of us quickly started to do the math. And we knew after the first push if it was going to be a good day or a bad day, and if that 6th push was going to require you to dig deep. And you know, on a normal great day down there, that 6th push was a real bear, and we were lucky to get 2, maybe 1.8. But that's the way. So I had to find out a method to get folks to buy into that process of just one foot in front of the other. We're going to take it one chunk at a time. And you know, someone like Ian, who's got these long expeditions behind his inexperience, that played huge dividends for us. And you know, Bradley was new to that, and like you said, he could run out ahead. And so what we did was I was able to take the lead on the first couple of pushes. I think I did like 1, 2, 3, and 4. Maybe even Bradley did 4. And then we would turn it over to Bradley to see if he could pull us along. And we would say, okay, Bradley, you got to wait at the next, you know, got to wait the next hour and a half. It was like back then, my little 4-year-old running up to the curb being like, wait, you can't cross the street without us.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool. We'll come back to the team at the end. I'm going to pass it on to Keith again here There's 2 or 3 slides on weather, Keith, conditions, weather, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I'll just let you.
You know, fortunately, we had, you know, looking back through the notes, there was on average really fair weather conditions. We were fortunate, and you know, for those of us that are keeping a pulse on what the Messner Route has looked like since 2015 and even before, I consider us pretty fortunate, especially in the last couple of years. They've had some atrocious weather conditions down there where they're getting, you know, snowfall that really detracts their progress, strong windstorms. Yes, we had wind. Yes, we had very poor weather conditions where we couldn't even see the front of our skis. And the goal of getting to the next mile marker, that mental mile marker seemed so distant because we were stumbling all over ourselves and we could barely even see. It was like, you know, the proverbial snow globe. But for the most part, we had stable weather conditions, which allowed us to meet all those targets. And, you know, reflecting back on that, Ian, the challenge of skiing in those whiteout days for me was, how do we effectively keep the pace going, right? And that, if you've never tried it before, it's really hard to do. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, for me, it was interesting because we always said we'd keep in sight of each other, which of course is necessary. And sometimes that sight was distant on a day like this, or if I go to the next slide, when it was not so good and there was a lot of wind and a lot of low cloud, and then on another day where you really couldn't see anything, and it was quite scary because you felt like you were on the edge of a precipice. I had a lot of vertigo on those days. It's really weird, yeah, where you just don't know where you are and you have to stay. You're just looking at the back of the other guy's sled in front of you. Really, that's what you're doing.
Reading the word expedition.
What's that?
Reading the word expedition.
That's right. Yeah, on the back of the sled. So each day had its challenges. Those days were particularly tough because they tended to be a bit warmer as well. And so the worst weather we had was on warmer temperatures, which made it much harder to move your skis, but also you'd overheat quickly. So there were 2 or 3 other things going on as well as just the wind and the snow blowing, you know?
Yeah. And then, you know, do you remember trying to, like, you know, trying to ski right next to like the back of somebody, like in a different line, just so that you didn't have to focus so intently on that sled in front of you? I know we tried that strategy out, but yeah, I remember those days having to put in almost twice as much work to get through those 6 pushes a day to get to 12 miles. And I know on those worst weather days, we couldn't meet that goal. I mean, you know, after the 6th push, we were lucky to be at 10, and you felt like you did 20 because every step just took everything out of you just to stay in control, you know? Yeah,
yeah. So those were very tough days. The other thing was, on those days, what happened to me, I'll just give you a little bit of background as well, and it's back to this too much training and not enough eating maybe. But partway through the expedition, in fact, before I left, I realized I had a pain in my heel. I didn't know what it was. I thought, oh, it'll go away after a few days. And it just got worse and worse. And I had plantar fasciitis in one foot. And it felt like a nail was being driven into my left heel every time I put my foot down. And so on those days that you couldn't see, we were falling over sideways a lot over those ridges. And that was a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And when I got to the end of that day, I was pretty much done every day on those bad weather days, especially. So I had to find what I would be a coping mechanism. And the only way I coped with that is break each day down into the next hour. Hey, in an hour, I can eat one of those wonderful Cliff Bars. In 2 hours, we're going to have another break. And in 5 hours, we may well be at camp. Yeah, so you know, you find a coping mechanism, and not listening to music all day, just walking. Let your mind go where it wants to go. And those were ways we got through that. We all had our own coping mechanisms, but my struggles were pain and how am I going to do this? How am I going to keep going every day when I've got 700 kilometers left to go and I can hardly walk, never mind drag this damn sled around, you know?
And was there a climax for you with that threshold of pain? Did it ever get easier mentally on you, or was you know, at some point I remember, you know, you accepted this was going to be your reality.
Yes, I knew this wasn't going to get better. I mean, I think 2 or 3 things happened. One is we talked about it. The other guys in the other tent didn't know what was going on, really. You did, because you saw me at the end of every day, but they didn't really know, and we didn't really talk about it because there was no future in that. But because you took some of my weight and made it easier for me to keep up, that was a lot better. But I realized that as long as I could keep putting one ski in front of the other, one day this will end. This is not a life sentence. If I can keep doing this, and when I got to within 2 or 3 days of the end, I pretty much realized that we could do it then. But there was a period where it was very difficult for probably a week or 2, you know.
Yeah, and that was emotional for me because, you know, there's not, you know, I knew the team would have picked you up and carried you, right? And I knew I knew that if it was too great, we'd have to talk about what it looked like you not finishing the expedition. But that never entered our mindset. That never entered your mindset. And, you know, I was happy to listen to what I felt at times was just like the explosion of, you know, like just, oh no, you know, like this is just painful. But I knew I needed to support you in any way that I could without being able to do it for you. And to witness that, to see that, you know, I think it was monumental. It was a monumental challenge to overcome. And you did it in style, in my opinion. And I commend you for that. It's sort of a highlight of the expedition for me, thinking about that.
Yeah. And you know, that's wonderful you say that, Keith, and we both shared that in the tent. But the other thing was that I tried to distract myself. And the way I distracted myself was through several things. And one was the photography and the videography that I knew I had to get if there was going to be a successful documentary. So I actually pursued those shots, and I pursued those things to distract myself from the pain and the problems that I had and the slowness that I had. So that helped me get through it when it was really bad. I said, okay, I've got a mission. I'm on a mission here. And it's not just to walk to the South Pole, it's actually to make a film. So let's get on with that.
And I think at sometimes I was like, Ian, what are you doing? You got to be in here resting that heel, and you're out there staging the shot at the end of a 6 push day, 9 hours, you know, the 10th hour, you're out there, you know, getting the shot ready and getting the footage that ultimately resulted in the movie. And so that's an interesting insight. And I remember some of those days clearly.
Yeah.
You know, something else that we did was on that next slide, you know, Ian brings up the team and how we dealt with the challenge of being away from home during some monumental times, right? We missed the Christmas holiday. We missed the New Year's. You know, I was the only statesider, and so I missed Thanksgiving, which in my family, you know, there's 80 some people that get together around a table at the cousin's house, and we filled our space up with tokens from home. And so in this shot, you can see we've got Annie here in the office prepared an awesome South Pole poetry slam, some little fireplace. And in fact, that's what we did for one whole week. We asked the team to, you know, put down on paper a poem that they would share with each other in the tent on what became a ritual for us, which was our Sunday night dinner. And this is one of the Sunday night dinners on the expedition where we got together, and we had prepared in advance, I think 5 separate Sunday night dinners where we didn't eat the regular food that we had, the Mountain House or whatever we were eating. We had gotten like instant potatoes and some ground beef, and we brought that in, and some of us carried it for 15 days before we were able to enjoy it. I think that really allowed us to reflect on the week, think about the folks at home, and come together at a set time to recap what we did, but look ahead at the next week and what we were accomplished. And I know that was a highlight for me, looking at the tinsel and that little tree, that little Christmas tree that's right there in between Bradley's head. That's something that my kids made, and I carried the whole way. We kept up in the tent at night.
So who had the best poem?
Bradley won the poem, and we actually do have it. It's one of the blogs from it's on the PolarExplorers website. We highlighted him. He actually had a chance to read it out into the world on our nightly call-ins. Ian, that next shot's pretty good. Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. And you know, this to me, this of course Christmas Day, but it sums up the atmosphere and the camaraderie, because Christmas morning, Keith and I were in our tent lounging around, eating some of Stacy's banana cake, if I remember, actually, which was good.
I think we saved it, right?
We did, yeah, we did. We had extra coffee, but then Andy came over from the other tent and brought us each a chocolate Santa. And Andy had carried these in his sled and made a big deal on Christmas Day of giving us each a chocolate Santa. And small thing, but what a wonderful gesture, you know, and it was so wonderful to share gifts on that day and have a day off and have a laugh and do that. And I think that went right through the expedition. So we're very fortunate that it did, really.
Yeah. And in this, it just worked out that Christmas was our second layover day. And
yeah,
I remember us like 10 days out, wondering what was going to happen on Christmas and where we were going to be at, and if we were going to be at the right spot, and if we were going to be able to take a layover day. I even remember a couple of days before thinking about that, because, right, we were close enough that we were starting to think about, okay, well, when, you know, how's this going to wrap up, and when's it going to wrap up? And I hope it wraps up, you know, with the long time spent out there, and of course the injury but you've got something else behind your shoulder there, and it looks like
yeah. I'll let you. We'll go to the next slide, and I don't know if you wanted to introduce that or ask me about that or whatever.
Well, first I want to ask you, did you carry this thing the whole way?
Yep.
And what's its name?
Here he is.
Oh, awesome.
He's called Oscar. He's a cat. And every year I go back to the UK, and I go to a very small school in Wales, and I speak to the kids. There's probably about 30 kids there, and I speak to them every year. I've done it for 12 years now. And the year I was going to the South Pole, they realized that. And so one year they presented me with Oscar. And he's an orphan. They found him in the street outside the school, and he became the school mascot. And they wanted me to take him to the South Pole. So I said, of course I will. My wife made him Antarctic clothes, the same as I had. And I carried him to the South Pole, and we've got some wonderful footage of him in the film, riding on a sled, riding on the skis at the South Pole, doing all kinds of goofy stuff. And, you know, he actually really motivated me to get to the South Pole, because every night I'd pull him out of the sled and he'd kind of just pop out of the sled and look at me. And he's got this wonderful, determined look on his face. And I'd look at him and think, you know, I can't take him back to that school in Wales and tell the kids, I'm sorry, but Oscar didn't get to the South Pole. And I thought, okay, I hung him up in the tent. He motivated me to carry on. And he was a big part of the team, and had a lot of fun with Oscar. So I took him back and presented him back to the kids. And a year later, they insisted I have him. So now he's on my desk. And whenever I speak to kids or adults even, or corporations in Canada here, I take him along, and he's a big hit. So Oscar was a part of the expedition there. And we'll go to the next slide, because when you get very close to the South Pole, you see this sign. And I really wished we'd had that about a month before in the middle of a blizzard. It would have been much more useful, because the South Pole is about 100 feet behind you here.
I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I knew I was in the right area.
Right on.
At least we're going the right way.
So Keith, I'll go to the picture of the South Pole and tell us what your feelings were when we got to the South Pole. How did you feel? And one thing I'll say here, notice we're all in the same order as on the first picture of us at the start, interestingly.
Yeah, you know, in this moment here, we've got some really bright faces on. I think we're a little shocked at the, for me, I was shocked at the suddenness of how the expedition ended. Right? At 2 years of planning, and every step is methodically approached, except for the moment where it's done, right? You spend so much time thinking about the journey, and then when you ultimately achieve the goal, the reflection about the experience, the vividness of each of those days is much stronger than actually arriving there. And I remember sort of the commentary, even as we were skiing up, because off to the frame here, there's a warm tent with tea. And do we stop in there first, or do we go to the pole first? And then, of course, you know, everyone's answer was, of course we stop and have a cup of tea. And so, yeah, that's my take on it. And Ian and I were chuckling about the invitation that was extended to us by the South Pole station there, and the tour that we were giving, which seemed like one of the longest things we'd done in a, you know, it was totally foreign, but it lasted like 3 hours, didn't it, Ian?
It seemed like that, yeah.
We were famished by the end of it. Pumping sweat.
Well, it was very bizarre to be in that environment with a whole bunch of people when you hadn't seen a man-made thing for 50 days, and suddenly you see this honking big station with stairs and basketball courts and greenhouses and weight rooms and stuff. But the bizarre thing was they're working there, and we weren't really welcome, although we'd walk from the coast. So we were kind of chucked out after a while and slept in a tent outside. So that was a little bizarre to finish our South Pole day back in the same tent again.
Yeah, it seems to me like reaching the South Pole, you know, if you think about this compared to another long, say, a mountain expedition where you reach the summit and then, you know, you still have a lot of time left. You still have to go all the way back down, and you have all that time to kind of process the achievement of reaching the top. And then, you know, there's a lot of journey left, where this, you know, you spend all this time getting there, and then it's just over.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the emotion was twofold. One was tremendous relief that I never, ever had to drag those sleds anywhere ever again. That was the first thing I thought of. But the second thing I thought of was, it's really sad it's over. It's over. We now never have to do this again. We can go back and do whatever we're doing. And of course, you feel at a loose end, actually. What am I going to do tomorrow? I don't have to pack the tent up and drag the sled around. So it was a little bizarre. So we'll just move on to the next slide here. And as we talked about, one of the things that I always wanted to do with this, I've made lots of movies myself and on other expeditions, but this time I wanted to do something different. And I really wanted to have a memento and something that may do well in the film festival circuit. And we achieved that. And I hired a professional filmmaker at the end. He did a fantastic job. We were in 13 film festivals, won 7 awards. It's been shown all around. Keith went to one of the film festivals in the States and introduced it, actually.
Yeah, that was fantastic. It was really well received. It was the most unique of the documentaries that they had there.
Yeah.
And certainly everyone wanted to come and learn about it and learn about the mystique of this place. And yeah, well done on that. It's a really,
so it was, you know, that was a big part of the thing. So we've shown it all around the world. And I'll go to the next slide, because if you want to see a trailer of it or some more information or the blogs that I sent out, go to my website, go to the documentary, and you'll see all about the documentary. You'll see the trailer. And Keith and I even talked about somehow live streaming this thing. I don't know how we'll do that, but maybe there's a way, because we can only show it in festivals and theaters and my private speaking gigs, because we don't have the license for the music for sale. Unfortunately, it's too expensive. The music's wonderful in the film, and we'll see what we can do. Maybe that's another event we could host.
Yeah, I think we just have a PolarExplorers Film Festival.
yeah,
Yeah, great idea. Let's do that. So I wanted to show you very quickly, there's no fancy camera equipment went into this, okay? There's the main camera, a Nikon P7800. It's point and shoot pretty much. But the key with that is this piece of tackle, which is a high-end Sennheiser microphone that enabled the sound to be wonderful even in those high wind days. So, and the last piece of tackle, of course, is a GoPro. So those were the 3 cameras, really, the 3 things that I had. But interestingly, halfway through the expedition, that blew away and is now somewhere buried under 25 feet of snow in Antarctica. So I was left with this. So I put a glove on the end of it for the second half of the expedition, and that actually worked pretty well, Keith. It seemed to make any difference.
We got creative with some fixes. I remember having to.
Yeah. And so that was like, the filming was really difficult, because the last thing you want to do when I couldn't keep up and I was groveling at the back for miles behind was get out the camera and do some shooting, but you'd take 15 minutes just to get your gloves off, get the camera out, freeze your hands, put it back in. But I did some of that. I don't regret any of it, but that added a whole other dimension to this thing that helped me in a way, but also was a bit of a struggle sometimes. But this camera's been great. Been across Australia to Antarctica twice now, still going strong. So I wanted to show you that, and then I'll pass it over to Keith for this picture.
This is us getting on the plane after having a few days of rest at the Union Glacier base camp there. And I think we're all showered in this, if I remember correctly. I'm cleanly shaven, as I always am. Throwing it back to the start of this. And I really, you know, the smiles are the thing that gets me every time I look at this. And I really appreciate Ian for his time in joining us on this PolarExplorers journey, not only today, but in trusting all of us to make that dream of getting there a reality and sharing some of the insights. And I'm sure that there might be some questions out there. And if there are, Ian and I are happy to answer those.
Yeah, I had a question. Did you encounter any crevasses or?
Yeah, Bud, thanks a lot. So in the preparation process, as we were dialing in our equipment, looking at all the ounces and pounds, the reality of the crevasse danger, which is very low on this route, the reality of the crevasse danger is really low on this particular route. If you're coming in on a different route, the Hercules route, there is a little bit more exposure. It's a longer route. They've been recommending bringing a crevasse rescue kit on that route for a few years. Our particular year, the flight providers encouraged us to get a very small setup and bring it. So we started digging. I started digging around on the internet and found the lightest harness, the lightest rope, the lightest pulley, and we put together a very light, personalized kit so that we could manage anything if it did happen. So we did bring some extra equipment in case of a crevasse fall, but like I started with, the exposure is very minimal. When we were briefed at the start of the expedition by the flight providers, they have access to very in-depth mapping of Antarctica and its crevasse and crevasse fields. And so they identified some areas. And actually throughout the expedition, we were updated regularly on what the conditions were like out ahead of us, because there was teams that were flying and driving. Pardon me. Yeah, you can just leave that there. Excuse me, just had somebody poking in here. Ian, if I remember correctly, wasn't this solo skier in front of us, I think his name was it Richard? Didn't he come across a crevasse? I believe that was, I'd have to go back to my log book, and he simply just skied over it, Bud.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he did. It was minor, and he skied over it, and we made a diversion, basically. Yeah. So we skied across a whole bunch of cracks in the ice and things like that, but nothing.
Nothing huge. Yeah.
Nothing.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So some of the things that happened were unusual, and it was quite funny watching Bradley because he didn't expect this. And that's where the whole ice field settles. And it settles with a great big whoomph, and it goes down quite a bit. And then you just carry on skiing. And I think Bradley was wanting to ski home at that point. He seemed quite perturbed by it.
It's unnerving.
It happened a few times.
I'd like to make two related questions. The first one is, okay, you say there were no crevasses, but what were the things that were obstacles to you? Like, was it the wind strength? Was it sastrugi? You had it? That's one question. And the other one is an average of how many hours did you advance every day, and how many miles or kilometers did you advance every day as an average, you know?
As far as our daily progress, our average for the trip was 12 nautical miles. And we covered that in 8.5 hours of skiing. We did that for 44 days with 2 rest days. So that's built into the average there. As far as the conditions that thwarted us the most, or that were the most challenging, and Ian correctly analyzed this early on in the expedition, it's like a plowed field that runs for 500, a freshly plowed field that runs for 500 nautical miles. And what we mean by that is that the surface is constantly changing. There's constantly ups and downs, small features, large features. All of this is called sastrugi. Some of the sastrugi was meters high, some of it was centimeters high, but there was nothing flat for you to ski on. And so that was the challenge, was in route finding, how do you get around those micro features to make it the most efficient route? And you know, the daily toll of what Ian was mentioning when there were whiteout conditions, you know, slipping and sliding, and the constant torque on your body with the big sled behind you. So those were the challenges for me, Ian. I'm not sure what they were for you.
Yeah, all of those things. But the other thing that I found particularly challenging sometimes were the steepness of the slopes. There were some times where it was more or less flat, undulating, but the 87th degree was brutal. It was quite steep, which meant you had to zigzag up the slope with the sled. But secondly, because of the steepness of the slope, the wind was stronger. So the steeper the slope, the stronger the wind. So it was a double whammy going up that degree. And once we got up that degree onto the polar plateau, it changed quite a bit. It was much colder, but it just wasn't quite as challenging, you know. So there were times where it was quite steep, Keith, actually.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
Eric, we're at about an hour in. I don't want to take up too much of the time here. We could keep talking.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody else has questions, I know that I have one more, but I'll leave it up for anybody else here. I know we've got...
Mark, you still want to sign up?
Yeah, no problems.
I love it.
Look, I said to you, I need the challenge. Let's just, yeah, I will, obviously you and Annie will give me a whole load more, but Ian, I think I'm going to touch base with you. I'd already pulled up your website, so I think it's probably worthwhile touching base with you and having a chat. But yeah, you know, it sounds great. Pictures are wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
I've got some gear you can buy, actually, Mark, if you like.
Yeah, some Cliff
I
Bars.
wouldn't take the Cliff Bars.
No, look.
If I may, I'd like to make two additional questions, if possible. One is, I'm not really aware, are you having this expedition for this year again, or when are you planning the next one, considering all the world situation? That's question number one. And the other one, a little bit more technical. This Messner Route, I understand if I multiply 42 days times 12 nautical mile per average, it means about 500 nautical miles for the route. Is that a similar distance that the original Amundsen route? Those are the two questions, if possible. Thanks.
Go ahead, Keith.
Okay, I'll leave Eric and Annie to answer the question about what the availability for the expeditions are this season. Amundsen's route, I think, certainly it was a longer ski for him. The Messner route is considered a standard coast to pole route. Another popular one is the Hercules route. Both of those are accessible with a minimum of expense when you want to start considering the logistic of getting to the start as compared to the Amundsen route, which would require a much longer flight time, much larger expense. That's why those aren't accomplished on a regular basis. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes.
Yeah, and as far as the planning the expedition moving forward, you know, this is the Messner Route is one that we plan for regularly, but as you can imagine, it takes a special type of person to want to take this on and join this team. So it's something that we end up doing every several years or so. So it's just, you know, when those people line up right and we all get together and we can kind of form a cohesive team that we make this expedition happen.
Thank you.
What's your question, Eric?
Oh, actually, we've got one from Ron here. He sends his thanks from tropical sunny Costa Rica, but also he asked if you had any difficulties regarding food and what would you leave out or change for another expedition?
Yeah, I can, you know, in terms of my role as the team leader in Polar Explorers, we supplied breakfast and dinner for the team. And those were around 2,500 calories split between breakfast and dinner. And that consisted of a special blend of granola and powdered milk and for breakfast, and nuts and fruit. And then dinners consisted of, you know, a special soup that we fortified with powdered chicken fat, and then a bagged freeze-dried meal, lots of different varieties. And I'll have a good chuckle because, Ian, do you remember Andy's least favorite dehydrated meal?
Yeah, it comes out in the film.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's very funny. It's beef and broccoli stir fry.
Broccoli.
And it's a good job we got to the South Pole when we did, because we had 3 days worth of food left, and I think it was 12 helpings of beef and broccoli.
Yeah, nobody liked the beef and broccoli.
No. So I think Keith, maybe a little more variety. I know you were big on the king chicken or whatever the hell it was called, but
yeah,
after 8 days in a row, I got a bit tired of that. You know.
I think everybody had a week's worth of different flavors. But don't you remember that when we got down there, I had prepped everything, and one of the requests was Andy had written no chicken, right? And in fact, it wasn't no chicken. It was actually no winged birds. He didn't like any birds. So all the turkey that I allocated for him, he wasn't touching. So I think we wound up with a little bit more turkey, and he wound up with a little bit more beef and broccoli. But yeah, that's an important role. The team members were expected to provide their own lunch foods. And if you haven't been on an expedition like this, it's not like you stop and have lunch for, you know, half an hour. You're breaking every hour and 15 minutes. And you have a quick snack, and a snack usually consists of maybe a Cliff Bar, maybe a handful of almonds, maybe some sort of a gummy bear, electrolyte gummy bear, maybe some dried fruit, maybe some beef jerky, whatever you prefer, whatever you want to carry, whatever is going to get you to a 2,000 calorie mark for the day. And I supplemented mine personally. I supplemented my food with powdered protein shakes that really helped me at the end of the day recover. And that has become a part of the routine, is supplementing with some easy digestible liquid calories that will replace those electrolytes and protein that you're using during the day. Ian might be able to talk a little bit more about what he chose.
Same kind of stuff, really. It's just to stuff some food in your mouth and keep going and have a drink, really. You don't want to hang around too long, and so it's all about the end of the day. But I think it's hard to appreciate that after so many days, it doesn't matter what you eat, you can't eat enough.
Yeah.
And your body starts to shrink, and after about 4 or 5 weeks, you notice your muscles aren't responding, and you notice it's harder to move around, and things are happening to your body. And it's really hard to eat enough, because otherwise you've got to carry more. You can't carry enough to eat enough.
One of my questions is, obviously there was a ton of planning, Keith, like you said, almost 2 years of planning that went into this. And my question is, what was the biggest challenge that you hadn't anticipated? And for Ian, maybe it sounds like the plantar fasciitis probably qualifies there.
Yeah, that would be I never imagined I'd get injuries like that. No, that was my biggest challenge for sure. Go ahead, Keith.
The biggest challenge, I think going into it was, for me, was how the team was going to mesh, how that group dynamic was going to mesh, right? We took care of all of the gear, right? Best tents, best stoves, best skis, best clothing. We made sure all of that was good. Healthy food, nutritious food. You knew you weren't going to get enough of it, but you had enough to get you through your goal. But what were the team dynamics? What was each person going to bring to the plate that was going to help us get to our goal? And, and what during the expedition was going to test us. You know, at the start of it, you know, no one would have known that it was going to be Ian's heel, or it was, you know, so that those were the unsettling things that you can't plan for, that you try and create structure for. And what I mean by that is like the Sunday night dinners and making sure that, you know, you have that arranged, encouraging the guys to bring stuff for the celebrations, that those milestones that you're going to meet. Maybe it isn't over a holiday where it's easy to like tack on. Maybe it's like the halfway celebration. And so just being thoughtful about how you're going to recognize those milestones was part of why we had success, and also a part of the struggle while we were on the expedition, for me personally.
And I think for me, you know, going into a trip like this, it's all about the team, how we're going to mesh together, but having a sense of humor. And I think that came out in spades, and we had lots of laughs, lots of funny things happened. And that helped get us through those difficult times and bring a sense of humanity and normality to the whole thing. And I think it was the team that concerned me the most to start with, because I didn't know two of the guys. And when I got there and we meshed so well, it became the strongest part of our expedition.
Great, thanks.
If I may, another last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. How would you compare the difficulty of doing the whole route for the South Pole versus the whole route for the North Pole? You know, just to have an idea and a potential comparison, please.
Keith, I think that you're probably the best person to answer this one.
Yeah, so my experience, you know, obviously this expedition skied in from what they consider the coast in Antarctica. I've come close to skiing to the coast to the North Pole, got dropped off at 84.5 and went to the North Pole in 2009. You know, that expedition is very dynamic. The Arctic Ocean is very dynamic. It's unpredictable. You know, there is a component of luck that is uncontrollable that you need to have in order to accomplish a full North Pole trip successfully. One hasn't been accomplished. There hasn't been a North Pole expedition since 2014. That would go from the coast to the pole. There was an epic expedition this last winter. Borghausen and Mike Horn skied over the Arctic Ocean through the North Pole to Longyearbyen, which was an 80-day, you know, one for the record books. And that has hardship. The Arctic Ocean has hardship like no other. The reality of Antarctica is that, you know, you wake up in the morning in the same place that you went to sleep. And for 3 days at the North Pole, I woke up every day at the same place, but I skied 15 hours for 3 days just to get back to the same place. And so if you can think about that in your mind and how frustrating and agonizing that is on an expedition, that is how dynamic the North Pole is, and sort of uncomparable in contrast to the Antarctica, not to mention the open water and the leads and the humidity. And so, yeah, that's my insight into the two. That might be a good show, the contrast and comparison of those two.
Thank you.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, last chance for questions.
Yeah,
Can I ask a question, please?
Thank you for putting this on. It's really nice.
Yeah.
Great seeing you, bud.
Yeah.
Eric, can I ask a question, please?
Oh, go ahead, please.
Alex?
Yeah, hello, everybody. I dialed in slightly late from England, but really super to hear everything that's been said. So thanks, Keith. Thanks, Eric. the probability of you running this trip next year, the Messner trip, apologies if you've already answered this.
Oh, the probability. I mean, you know, this like I had mentioned, it's really just about getting the team together. And so right now we do have a good bit of serious interest in the Messner Route for this coming year. Obviously, we don't know if there are going to be any extended, you know, travel restrictions come November. But you know, kind of as Keith let in the beginning, this is an expedition that can be planned for, you know, well over a year in advance. You know, it's not one that many people will just sign up for and go, you know, the month before and then leave off in November. So in the past we've been developing teams, you know, a year or more in advance and kind of looking out at that same timetable. So I would say the probability is good for this coming year, and better for North Pole 2021, or sorry, November 2021.
Cool, thank you very much.
Yeah, there is going to be interest. Sorry, it's Mark Shuttleworth here again. There will be interest for not this coming year, but the following year. Because obviously Keith and Annie already know that this is something that I will be doing. It's just a timing issue for me. One question for Ian. You've done quite a bit of climbing. You know, if you look at the physical exertion that's required for some of the big summit days, and then compare that with, you know, or can you compare it with the 40-odd days? You know, because, you know, let's put it into perspective. I did the North Pole with Keith and Annie, and to be honest, the physical side of it was relatively easy. I think that the mental side, as Keith says, about getting up in the morning and finding you've moved the wrong way, and you've got to sort of, you know, spend a couple of hours getting back, and, you know, you're hitting open water, and that's more challenging, but physically wasn't challenging. So what I'm trying to do is trying to get a handle on, you know, or a comparison as to, you know, what it's like for, you know, from what I'm used to, compared with what you went through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can try and answer that. I mean, the only way I can describe it is climbing a mountain, even if it's McKinley in 40 days or whatever it is no comparison to skiing to the South Pole, because I think the mountaineering is more intense. It's more intense in short bursts. Skiing to the South Pole is just one foot in front of the other forever. And it's quite a different mindset. Yeah. Whereas I think there's many more objective dangers when you're mountaineering that can kill you in no time. Whereas going to Antarctica, the weather is insidious, the terrain's insidious, but I think the wearing down of your body and the mindset is pretty key. So it's quite different. I can liken it to cycling across Australia through the outback, or cycling to the Arctic Ocean. Similar to that, more than similar to mountaineering, which, as I say, is much more initially intense. Would be. I hope that's answered it, Mark. We can talk more again.
Yeah. We'll if you don't mind, we'll carry on at
anytime. Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add to that oops, unmute. I would just add to that a big difference between those two are the rest days, and that the fact that they had 2 rest days in 44 days. Is that right? 2 rest days in that many days. Whereas with mountaineering, everything Ian said is correct, but you do have a tendency to take rest days on a more regular basis because they're necessary. It's also a real good opportunity for your body to recover. So I think, as Keith and Ian have mentioned, the hardest part of this trip is waking up every day and having to move and not getting those rest days when you feel that you need them or less of them.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. Great.
Okay.
Well, again, Keith, Ian, thank you so much for your time today and sharing the story of your expedition.
Thank you, Ian.
I really appreciate it. So
No problem. Thanks, Keith. That was great. Good to see you again.
Great to see you, Ian. Great to see everybody out there. Stay tuned for the next one. Eric, when's the next one of these?
it's going to be next Thursday, same time. We're going to be talking about photography in cold weather environments. So if you're looking to learn how to take that good shot in the polar climates, be sure to tune in.
Right on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Great, guys.
Okay.
See you later.
Take care.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Keith, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Hey, Annie.
I wondered if
Hey
we
there.
would Zoom with you a few minutes.
Yeah. Hey, Marty, go for it.
We can call you back up or stay on this, whoever is.
That's cool. We can stay on this. What's up, man? How you doing?
You're doing great. How about you?
Hey, Eric, why don't you stop recording and then
Missed
then
another
it'll be a
North Pole
record.
season.
And Andy, if you want to stay on too, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Two in a row now. We've got